Hey y'all, so I'm here to do another quick video, this time just on two different concepts. One being a point of punctuation, and another on a grammatical concept of the compound sentence. So the punctuation that I would like to talk about for just a moment is not the comma, it's not the hyphen, it's not the semicolon, it is the colon. Colon. Colon, which looks like that, right? You can see that, two dots, where a semicolon is the dot and the comma almost looking like a J. So how do you use a colon? Well, keep in mind that if you were a true master of writing in whatever language you wrote in whatever language, if we're just talking about the English language, you could use the colon for a lot of things, I bet. Creative writers can kind of do what they want. They can get away with doing what they want. But for our purposes, purpose of the final exam, you need to know two things that the colon can do. Number one, you use a colon to introduce a list of objects or things or whatever it might be. So for example, I could say, I love three things. I love three things. And now let's say I want to list what those three things are. I would do a colon, and now I would list them. My students, my family, and my life, right? Something like that. So again, one of the reasons to use a colon is to introduce a list. So you'd have a sentence, I love three things, colon, my students, my family, and my life, or whatever it could be. Now, there's another thing you need to know about colons. You can use it to introduce a quote, right? So if I were to say something like, Shakespeare has said many profound things throughout his plays, right? So let's say I had that sentence, and then I had another sentence, and I said, here's one. Now, here's one. And now I would put a colon and then quotation marks to introduce it, whatever it might be. For example, to be or not to be, blah, 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 right? So again, so you can use the colon to introduce a quote. You can imagine I had a sentence before this that said something like, Shakespeare's work is full of profound thoughts, period. And then my next sentence is, here's one, colon, right? Colon, to be or not to be, right? And that's a pretty poor sentence. I'd probably want to fill it out and say, to be or not to be, that is the question, and then period or whatever. So again, you can use, for the purposes of the final exam, you want to think of using the colon either to introduce a list, like I've done in number one here. I love three things, and then I colon, and then I list the three things, or to introduce a quote, right? So I could say Shakespeare's work is filled with profound thoughts. Here's one, colon, to be or not to be. And of course, I would, I would cite it or whatever. Hamlet, since this is from the play Hamlet. But of course, that doesn't really matter. But just so you know, there's a quote. So I hope that makes sense. So much then for punctuation. What about the compound sentence? So this is more of a grammatical. It's more of a grammatical concept than it is it's not punctuation. I've already touched upon this in one of my lengthier videos on the overview of the final exam, but a compound sentence is easy to understand, but you first need to understand a simple sentence. So again, a simple sentence might be, I woke up, right? What makes this a simple sentence? Well, we have our subject and we have our verb, woke up. And let's actually just make it even more simpler and just say, I awoke. I awoke. There's a complete sentence. We have a subject, which is the first person personal pronoun, I, and then the verb awoke, which is in the present, which is in the past tense, right? So that's a simple sentence. So how do we make it a compound sentence? Well, before we go on there, remember that we call this a simple sentence, but we also call it independent clause, right? It's not a dependent clause. Dependent clauses usually don't stand by themselves as sentences. They're usually connected to another independent or set of independent clauses, right? Though creative writers can kind of mess around with these rules. But so this is an independent clause. We have a subject and we have a verb. So we have a little subject here. We can change the color. We have a little subject here. We have a verb here. Now, if we want to make this a compound sentence, then what we need to do is we need to attach another independent clause to it. And usually the way we do that is by putting putting some punctuation on it and also adding a conjunction. So for example, I awoke, so I right? So now we've made a compound sentence here. We have I awoke, which is an independent clause, subject and verb. And now we have a comma. We have a conjunction, so. Remember your fanboys. These are the coordinating conjunctions. And now we have another independent clause. I yawned, right? I yawned. This I yawned could stand by itself with a subject and a verb. And this is a very kind of paralleled sentence. We have I as the subject, the first person pronoun, and then I as the subject again as the first person pronoun. We have a verb in the past tense, and we have another verb in the past tense. So there's a kind of reflection of structure or of form within these two clauses. Well. Anyway, we have two independent clauses. I awoke, comma, coordinating conjunction, so, and then another independent clause. I yawned. This is a compound sentence. Just by itself, if we were to just look at I yawned, we'd have a simple sentence. If we just look at I awoke, we would have a simple sentence. But because we have these two together, connected with a comma and a coordinating conjunction, we now have a compound sentence. Now remember, you could have complex sentences, which have a dependent clause and an independent clause, and you could have a compound complex sentence, which has two independent clauses and one dependent clause. A compound sentence just has two independent clauses, right? So make sure you understand that. You're going to be asked a question about that. Okay.